and it's chapter 13. I actually found my way to lit class by myself. Okay, I was just on the other side of Neferit's room, but still I felt a little more confident that I didn't have to ask to be led around like a helpless idiot new kid. Zoe, we saved a desk for you, Stevie Ray yelled the instant I got to class. She was sitting beside Damien and practically hopping up and down with excitement. She looked like a happy puppy again, which made me smile. I was really glad to see her. So, tell me everything. How was drama? Did you like it? Do you like Professor Nolan? Isn't her tattoo cool? It reminds me of a mask, kinda. Damien grabbed Stevie Ray's arm. Breathe, girl, and let her answer. Sorry, she said sheepishly. I guess Nolan's tattoos are cool, I said. You guess? Well, I was distracted. What? She said, and then her eyes narrowed. Did someone embarrass you about your mark? I swear people are just plain rude. No, that wasn't it. Actually, that Elizabeth, no last name girl, said she thought it was cool. I was distracted because, well, I was feeling my face get hot again. I decided that I was going to ask them about Eric, but now that I'd started talking, I wondered whether I should say anything. Should I tell them about the hall? Damien perked up. I feel a juicy tidbit coming on. Come on, Zoe. You were distracted because... He drew the word out into a question. Okay, I can sum it up in 2 words. Eric Knight. Stevie Ray's mouth dropped open, and Damien did a little pretend swoon, which he had to straighten up from right away because at that moment the bell rang, and Professor Penthesilea swept into the room. Later, Stevie Ray whispered. Absolutely, Damien mouthed. I smiled innocently. If nothing else, I was sure that I would love the fact that mentioning Eric would drive them all crazy for about an hour. Lit class was an experience. First of all, the classroom itself was totally different from any I'd ever seen. There were bizarrely interesting posters and paintings of what looked like original artworks filling every inch of wall space, and hanging from the ceiling were wind chimes and crystals, lots of them. Professor Penthesilea, whose name now I recognised from vampire sociology class and belonged to the most revered of all the Amazons, who everyone liked to call Professor P, was like something out of the movies. Well, the ones on the Sci Fi Channel. She had long, seriously reddish blonde hair and big hazel eyes, and a curvy body that probably made all the guys drool. Not that it's very hard to make teenage boys drool. Her tattoos were thin, pretty Celtic knots that traced their way down her face and around her cheekbones and made them look high and dramatic. She was wearing expensive looking black slacks and a moss coloured silk cardigan sweater set that had the same goddess figure embroidered over her breast as Neferit had been wearing. And now that I thought about it, and not Eric, I realised that Professor Nolan's blouse had the same goddess embroidered over the breast pocket of her blouse too. Hmm. I was born in April of the year 1902, Professor Penthesilea said, instantly grabbing our attention. I mean, please, she barely looked 30. So I was 10 years old in the April of 1912, and I vaguely remember the tragedy very well. About what am I speaking? Do any of you have any idea? Okay, I knew exactly what she was talking about, but it wasn't because I'm a hopeless history nerd. It's because whenever I was younger, I thought I was in love with Leonardo DiCaprio, and my mum got me the entire DVD collection of his movies for my 12th birthday. This particular movie I watched so many times, I had most of it memorized. I cannot tell you how many times I snot cried when he slipped off that board and floated away like an adorable popsicle. I looked around. No one seemed. Am I recording? I am. No one seemed to have any clue, so I sighed and raised my hand. Professor P smiled and called on me. Yes, Miss Redbird? The Titanic sank on the April of 1912, and uh, it was struck by the iceberg. It struck the iceberg late on Saturday night, the 14th, and sank just it. Do you know what it is? That's just made sense to me. And I realise I'm an idiot and sank just a few hours later on the 15th. I heard Damien suck air behind me and Stevie Ray's little, huh, yeesh. Had I really been acting so stupid that they were shocked to hear me answer a question correctly? I do love it when a new fledgling knows something, Professor Penthesilea said. Absolutely correct, Miss Redbird. I was living in Chicago at the time of the tragedy, and will never forget the newsies shouting the tragic headlines from the street corners. It was a horrid event, especially because the loss of the lives was so preventable. It also signalled the end of the one age and the beginning of another, as well as bringing about many much needed changes in shipping laws. We're going to study all of this, plus the deliciously melodramatic events of that night, in our next piece of literature, Walter Lord's meticulously researched book, A Night to Remember. Although Lord was not a vampire, and it really is a shame he wasn't, she added under her breath, I still find his take on the night compelling, and his writing style and tone interesting and very readable. Okay, let's get started. Last person in each row, get books for the people in your row from the long cabinet in the back of the room. Well, cool. This was definitely more interesting than Great Expectations. Pip? Estrella? Who cares? I settled in with A Night to Remember and my notebook opened to take notes. Professor P started to read chapter 1 aloud to us, and she was actually a good reader. 3 class hours almost over, and I'd liked all of them. Was it possible that this vamp school was actually more than a boring place that I went to every day because I had to, and besides that, all my friends were there? Not that all classes at SIHS had been boring, but we didn't get to study the Amazons and the Titanic from a teacher who'd been alive when it sank. I glanced around at the other kids while Professor P read. There were about 15 of us, which seemed about the average in my other class too. All of them had their books open and were paying attention, and then my eye caught something red and bushy on the other side of the room, near the rear of the class. I'd spoken too soon. Not all kids were paying attention. This one had his head down on his arms, and he was sound asleep, which I knew because his chubby, way too white and freckled face was turned in the other direction. His mouth was open, and I think he might have been drooling a little. I wondered what Professor P would do to the kid. She didn't seem like the kind of teacher who would be cool with some slug sleeping in the back of the room, but she just kept on with her reading, uh, interspersed with interesting first-hand facts about the early 20th century, which I really liked. I loved hearing about the flappers. I would definitely have been a flapper if I had been alive in the 1920s. It wasn't until the bell was about to ring that Professor P had assigned the next chapter as homework and told us we could all talk quietly amongst ourselves, that she acted as if she noticed the sleeping kid at all. He'd started to stir, finally lifting his head to display the bright red sleeping circle that was on the back of his forehead and looked bizarrely out of place beside his mark. Elliot, I need to see you, Professor P said from behind her desk. The kid took his time getting up and then dragged his feet, scuffing his untidy shoes over to her desk. Yeah? Elliot, you are, of course, feeling lit, but what's more important, you're feeling life. Vampire males are strong, honourable, and unique. They've been our warriors and protectors for countless generations. How do you expect to make the change into being who, uh, who is more of a warrior than man if you do not practice discipline that it takes to stay awake during class? He shrugged his soft-looking shoulders. Her expression hardened. I shall give you one opportunity to make up the zero for class participation. that you received today by writing a short paper on any issue that was important in America in the early 20th century. The paper is due tomorrow. Without saying anything, he started to turn away. Elliot, Professor P had dropped. Professor P's voice had dropped, and, thick with irritation, it made her sound way scarier than she seemed while she had been reading and lecturing. I could feel the power radiating from her, and it made me wonder why she would ever need a male to protect her. The kid stopped and turned back to face her. I did not excuse you. What is your decision about doing the work to make up today's zero? The kid just stood there without saying anything. The question calls for an answer, Elliot. Now. The air around her crackled with command, making the skin on my arms tingle. Seemingly unaffected, he shrugged again. I probably won't do it. That says something about your character, Elliot, and it's not something good. You're not only letting yourself down, but you're letting your mentor down too. He shrugged again and absently picked his nose. The dragon already knows how I am. The bell rang, and Professor P, with a disgusted look on her face, motioned for Elliot to leave the room. Damien, Stevie Ray, and I stood up and were starting to walk out the door when Elliot slouched by us, moving more quickly than I would believe possible for someone so sloth-like. He bumped into Damien, who was ahead of us. Damien made a "oops" sound and stumbled a little. I'm not going to read what Elliot said to poor Damien, but it's a terrible slur, and he says, "Get out of my way," pushing Damien with his shoulder so we could get through the door before him. I should smack the crap out of that jerk, Stevie Ray said, hurrying up to Damien, who was waiting for us. He shook his head. Don't worry about it. That Elliot kid has major problems. Yeah, like having poopy for brains, I said, and stared down the hall at the slug's back. His hair was certainly unattractive. Poopy for brains? Damien laughed and linked one arm through mine as we walked through Stevie Ray's, leading and right, linked one arm through mine and one through Stevie Ray's, leading us down the hall, Wizard of Oz style. That's what I like about our Zoe, he said. She has such a way with vulgar language. Poopy's not vulgar, I said defensively. I think that's his point, honey, Stevie Ray laughed. Oh, I laughed too, and I really, really liked how it sounded when he said, our Zoe, like I belonged, like I might be home.